Welcome back, everyone, as I continue pre-recording some reaction videos for you. It is now less than 24 hours until I leave on my next trip to Europe. I'm heading to London and then over to Bastogne in Belgium. I'm going to be visiting Luxembourg as well. Pretty excited about that. But today I want to revisit the channel Top 10s, which I know is one of the many in the Simon Whistler world. This one's called Top 10 Historical Events We'll Most Likely Never See Again. So we're going to dive into this. As always, a link is in the description to the original content if you want to check out their video without my commentary. Here we go.
Ten historical events we'll never see again. Number 10. Eugene Cernan, the last Apollo astronaut to walk on the moon. Eugene Cernan first went to space aboard Gemini 9 with a mission to do one of the very first American spacewalks. He next flew into space on Apollo 10 on May the 22nd, 1969, to pave the way for America's first moon landing.
And Apollo 10, my son Eli, who's 10 years old, was really into space race and just astronomy in general. We just got our first telescope yesterday. We're excited to start doing some astrophotography, things like that. And we've been talking a lot about this. Apollo 10, almost landed on the moon. Imagine being those guys, right? Their mission was to do everything that Apollo 11 was going to do, and then they started the descent down, and they got within a couple kilometers of landing on the moon's surface, and then went back up. It was just kind of a test run for everything.
Just 2 months later, Cernan came within 8 nautical miles, about 50,000 feet, of the moon's surface. Finally, in December 1972, Apollo 17 mission commander Eugene Cernan returned to space for the last time and became the last person to walk on the moon. The final Apollo mission included geological surveying and material sampling in the Taurus Littrow region. Before going back to the lunar module, he wrote his daughter's name, Tracy, in the dust. His last words before leaving were, "As we leave the moon at Taurus Littrow, we leave as we came, and God willing, we shall return with peace and hope for all mankind."
Yeah, and I would say this, we will see this again because the Artemis missions are already underway, and I think it's Artemis 3 is supposed to land. They've already done Artemis 1, which was basically a mission to the moon flying around. Artemis 2, I think, is going to be like an unmanned landing. And then Artemis 3, I'm pretty sure, is the one. I know it's the Artemis missions. And the plan right now is that they're going to put the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. So we are going back to the moon, and probably in the next couple of years. And then I believe the future missions are to actually establish a base on the moon. And all of this is going to be used as probably a test run for putting a person on Mars. Super excited to see all of this unfold.
Number 9. Janet Parker, the last person to die from smallpox. Smallpox is one of the deadliest viruses to have roamed the Earth, killing an estimated 300 million people in the 20th century alone.
Wow.
But in the late...
Think about that. I don't think I really considered smallpox killed 300 million people in the 20th century. When I think of smallpox, I think 1700s, 1800s. And honestly, we actually had our first kind of inoculations against smallpox in the 1700s, I'm pretty sure. I know a lot of George Washington's troops were inoculated from smallpox. I know that they did a lot of this during the Civil War. There were smallpox. They would actually scrape some of the virus off of a person who had smallpox and then put it into your system, and occasionally people died from that, but it was a very early version of doing this.
In the 1970s, with the help of the World Health Organization, the disease had been eradicated in most parts of the world. Unfortunately, Janet Parker, an English medical photographer, was exposed to the virus in a laboratory accident. On August the 24th, 1978, Parker was hospitalized and diagnosed with the deadliest strain of smallpox. She subsequently died on September the 11th of the same year.
Wow, that's in my lifetime.
On May the 8th, 1980, the World Health Organization declared that the smallpox virus had been eradicated. When scientists destroy the samples still being kept in laboratories in Atlanta and Moscow, the smallpox virus will become the first life form to have been intentionally wiped from the face of the Earth.
Let's hope that's the case. You never know where it might be lurking somewhere, but let's hope that's the case.
Number 8. Charles Carroll, the last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is the ultimate symbol of American liberty. It was originally drafted by Thomas Jefferson, signed by 56 delegates to the Continental Congress, and then ratified on the 4th of July, 1776. The last of the
kind of a little out of order there. It was some of the people signed on the 4th of July, but some people didn't sign until as late as August of that year. So I think he just got kind of things out of order a little bit there, but basically true. And Charles Carroll would sign Charles Carroll of Carrollton when he signed things.
56 signatories to die was Charles Carroll. Carroll served in the Congress and was elected to represent Maryland on the 4th of July before being elected to the Maryland Senate in 1781. He died in 1832 at the age of 95. Number 7. Rainey Bethea, last person to be executed in public in the United States. On August the 14th, 1936, the last public execution in the United States took place in Owensboro, Kentucky, when a black man named Rainey Bethea was hanged. Bethea had been convicted of the murder of a 70-year-old white woman. The fingerprints on the victim's throat was the evidence that ultimately led to his arrest. By 5 o'clock in the morning of the day of his execution, about 20,000 people, including over 200 sheriffs from around the country, were present to witness the hanging. Bethea marched toward the execution stand after sunrise, where he was hanged and pronounced dead at around 5:45 a.m. Public outrage over Bethea's manner of execution, which involved numerous errors and a general public media circus, made him the last person to be hanged in public in the country.
And probably one of the last people to be hanged, period, in the United States. Interesting, being that my family's from Kentucky, I've had some connections, family-wise, with some executions in Kentucky. Specifically, my grandfather, his great-uncle, was one of 4 guys who were murdered in the Brickyard in Olive Hill, Kentucky in 1918 by a guy named Melvin Collins. And apparently, basically the story was Melvin Collins was a draft dodger during World War I, and these guys had turned him in. And so he showed up at the Brickyard looking for the 4 guys he felt were responsible for him being arrested for this. And one by one, he shot and killed these 4 guys. And one of them happened to be my great-uncle. And actually, my grandpa's great-uncle, my own great-uncle, told me stories of remembering having seen the bullet holes in the house he grew up in because his grandfather had been one of the people that had been kind of in this guy's path. And the shooting had gone to a couple of other places. Long story short, Melvin Collins is arrested for these murders. He is tried, convicted, and executed in the electric chair, all within about a month of committing the murders. There were no drawn-out appeals for years and years and years. Justice was much more swift back then, especially in a situation where you had a room full of eyewitnesses who all saw the guy do what he did.
Number 6. Cleopatra VII, the last Egyptian pharaoh.
Oh, she wasn't really Egyptian.
Often depicted as a very beautiful lady, Cleopatra VII was just 18 when she inherited the throne of Egypt. An intelligent woman who could speak multiple languages, she was actually the first pharaoh of the Ptolemy dynasty who spoke Egyptian. Due to a conflict with the Romans, Cleopatra was removed from her throne and was forced to live in exile. It was on her return that she met Julius Caesar, who had taken control of Alexandria and fell in love with her at first sight. Caesar was stabbed to death on March the 15th, 44 BC, and shortly afterwards Ptolemy the 16th was allegedly poisoned by Cleopatra. Knowing she was in danger, she left the city for Tarsus, modern-day Turkey, where
Ptolemy the 16th, I think, being her brother/husband. I say /husband because I'm pretty sure, in the Ptolemy dynasty, first of all, they were primarily Greek. They weren't Egyptian, which is why they were saying she was the first of the Ptolemy dynasty that actually spoke Egyptian, because they were Greek. And their family tree is more of a family pole. It's like, if you watch Game of Thrones, think the Targaryens. I mean, they just intermarried over and over. Let me show you Cleopatra's family tree. All right, I'm not going to take the time to explain all of this, but basically you'll notice things. Here's Cleopatra VII, who we know is the Cleopatra, right? And her parents are Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra V. And, of course, Cleopatra V is a granddaughter of Ptolemy XII's father, making Cleopatra's parents uncle and niece to each other. And then, of course, up here, then you can see that it goes further than that, because Cleopatra III married Ptolemy VIII, who was also her uncle, and they were the parents of Ptolemy IX. And it goes back like that over and over again. So you have siblings and uncle and niece and first cousins marrying each other. This is the ultimate in inbrededness, right? I mean, I've never seen anything like this in any other family tree. Like, we joke about the royal families of Europe and how inbred they are because a lot of them are cousins, like Queen Elizabeth II and her husband, Prince Philip, were both descendants of Queen Victoria. But we're talking like second cousins there. Like, that has nothing on the multiple layers of marrying into your own family that Cleopatra's family tree was.
She met Mark Antony. When Antony committed suicide after defeat in battle, Cleopatra was determined to die as well. She died on 30 BC, where it is believed that she intentionally had herself bitten by poisonous asps due to the markings found on her arm when she died. Later studies, however, suggest that she was killed by drinking a mixture of poisons. After her death, Egypt became a Roman province. Number 5. Adrian II, the last married pope. During the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, a decree was issued that after ordination a priest could not marry. Coming from a Roman family, Pope Adrian II was nevertheless the last married Catholic pope over 500 years later, from 867 to 872 AD. He initially refused the papacy twice before being elected in 867, following the death of his predecessor, St. Nicholas I.
So I always found this interesting, and I don't want to get into a religious debate and things like that, but on one hand, I get it. As somebody who's been in ministry most of my adult life, I can see how it could be very beneficial to have someone who is completely dedicated to the church, right? You don't have a wife and kids that absorb your time. You've basically committed yourself fully to the church. And there are these images in the Bible of describing Jesus being the groom and the church being his bride, and so the priest being a representative of that. But also, the Catholic Church considers Peter to be the first pope, and Peter was married. So, Paul talks in the New Testament about how it would be preferable to not be married because then you could dedicate yourself, but he doesn't firmly outlaw that as being something. So I can see both sides of it.
He was married and had a daughter before he became pope, but refused to adopt celibacy or give up his wife when he ascended to the papal throne. Like his predecessor, Nicholas I, Pope Adrian was forced to submit in temporal affairs to the interference of Roman Emperor Louis II. Number 4. The last prisoner to leave Alcatraz. Alcatraz Federal Prison, also known as The Rock, was first used as a military prison during the Civil War and then as a federal prison from 1933 until it closed in March of 1963 due to the high cost of maintenance. Its first prisoners were 2 soldiers and 2 naval officers that refused to take an oath of loyalty to the United States. It housed several notorious inmates over the years, most notably Al Capone. Not a single prisoner successfully escaped The Rock, although there have been many attempts. Frank Warthenham was the last prisoner to leave Alcatraz on March the 21st, 1963. He was quoted as saying, "Alcatraz was never no good for..."
So it's interesting to think, as much as Alcatraz seems to be a part of our collective historical memory, and we talk so much about it, that it was only a federal prison for 30 years. And I actually knew the relative of one of the guys who tried to escape. The prisoner's name was Harry Brest. Yes, that was his name. And he was an uncle to a guy that I went to church with, who was actually one of the elders in our church. And I always thought it was interesting reading his story. His was one of the unsuccessful escape attempts. I believe there's at least 1 or 2 cases where they don't know for sure if somebody escaped, because somebody escaped and then they were never found and they were assumed to have died. But I don't know if there's any proof to that either way.
And nobody. Number 3. Last day of the USSR. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, formerly one of the world's superpowers, was founded in 1922 by the leaders of the Russian Communist Party and was a successor to the old Russian Empire, which had collapsed in 1917. The Soviet Union played a huge role in the Second World War, driving Nazi Germany back in an almost uninterrupted offensive which led to the fall of the Berlin Wall and ultimately the surrender of Germany. On the 21st of December 1991, the Alma-Ata Protocol was signed by representatives of 11 of the 12 former republics, excluding Georgia, which confirmed the dissolution of the Union and formally established the Commonwealth of Independent States.
This is one of the most significant historical events that I myself have had the opportunity to live through. I was in I was in 8th grade, I think, almost in high school when this all went down, and it was really quite incredible to watch in real time as the Berlin Wall came down and as this coup happened in Russia and the Soviet Union collapsed. It was a big, big, big deal.
The USSR was finally dissolved on December the 26th, 1991, a day
I was in
after
high school.
Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. Number 2. Last death in World War I.
Henry Gunther!
The First World War started in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and ended in 1918 after about 37 million more deaths. The signing of the armistice...
Not sure that number 37 million is accurate. I always thought it was closer to 20. I feel like I need to look this up. I know that the estimates can vary a lot. Yeah, so I think the mistake here is that I think there are some sources that report the total number of casualties in World War I is around 37 million, but that includes people who were wounded and didn't die. The deaths are probably between military and civilian deaths, probably 15 to 20 million.
This on November the 11th, 1918, at 11 a.m., marked the end of the war. The last soldier killed was Private Henry Gunther of the American Expeditionary
From
Forces.
Baltimore.
Gunther's platoon encountered a German roadblock as it advanced. Gunther charged the Germans with a bayonet after the Germans fired warning shots. While the enemy, aware of the impending armistice, tried to warn him off, they were eventually forced to shoot him through the left temple at 10:59. While no one is entirely sure what inspired his suicidal charge, his comrades speculated that he was obsessed with proving his worth after being demoted from the rank of sergeant. Gunther succeeded. The rank was reinstated posthumously.
Yeah, so I visited the site where Henry Gunther was killed. It's not too far from Verdun in France. And it is. It was totally a situation where everybody knew the armistice was about to take effect. Nobody wanted to shoot in that situation, but he started firing shots at this German machine gun nest, and they had no choice but to fire back, even though they were trying to wave him off, and his own men were telling him, Gunther he was obsessed with the fact that he had been demoted. He was trying to prove that he was not a coward, that he was a brave soldier. I think he was from Baltimore, and General Pershing wrote in his diary and later reported publicly that Henry Gunther was the last guy, at least on the Western Front, to die in the war.
Number 1, Elizabeth Dean, the last Titanic survivor.
She was a baby.
Elizabeth Gladys Dean, better known as Milvina, was a third-class passenger and the youngest of all the passengers of the RMS Titanic at only 10 weeks old. She was supposed to travel with her parents and 2-year-old brother, Bert, to America, where they hoped to open a tobacco shop aboard another ship, but was transferred to the Titanic following a coal strike. Moments after the ship hit the iceberg, her father hustled the family out of their quarters and into the lifeboats. Her father is among the 1,517 that perished in the disaster.
And credit to her father, who did not survive himself, for getting them up there right away, because by far the highest percentage of any class of people who died was the third-class people. And so the fact that he got his family up there and got them out of there, lots of credit to him for that.
But the rest of her family survived. She died on the 31st of May, 2009, at age 97.
Almost 100 years later. So that was pretty cool. I don't know if I'd necessarily agree that we'll most likely never see some of these things again. Obviously, some we can't because we'll never see another Titanic survivor. But I think we'll see more people walk on the moon. Things like that. So that was interesting. That was pretty cool. Something a little different. It's always nice to explore new things. So check out the original video and check out all their stuff. I'll put a link in the description. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.